You can utilize MIDI in our devices in a few different ways. Trigger any of the pads as a group or as a single melodic or keyboard instrument. Start and stop synced clips. Start and stop the 16 internal sequences on the Blackbox. Use MIDI CC messages to modulate or control various pad, track, or FX parameters. Receive MIDI program change messages to change the current preset. There are two standards for TRS MIDI, Type A and Type B. If you have two devices that use two different standards, you cannot connect them directly to one another. You will need the correct adapters for both devices. When both devices use the same standard, you can connect them directly to one another using a standard TRS cable. When both devices use different standards, you can use a standard 5-pin MIDI cable with the appropriate adapter on each end. Some devices support both standards. You can connect them directly to one another using a standard TRS cable. The Blackbox sends and receives TRS MIDI Type B only. The MX4 MIDI Eurorack module also works with TRS MIDI Type B only. The Blue Box, Bitbox Mark II, and Bitbox Micro can receive TRS MIDI Type A or Type B. The Blue Box and Bitbox Micro output TRS MIDI Type B only. The Bitbox Mark II does not support MIDI out. The Blue Box and the Blackbox feature a single USB MIDI device port on the rear panel. This port can power smaller MIDI controllers and can both send and receive MIDI. In the Tools menu, touch the MIDI tab to select a global channel for all pads. In this mode, the Blackbox will respond to MIDI note numbers 36 through 51, where note number 36 is mapped to the lower left pad and note number 51 is mapped to the upper right pad. When the Blackbox receives one of these note numbers, it is the same as touching the main pad screen. So if you have a one-shot, this will trigger it. If you have a synced clip, you can send that note number to both start and stop the clip, just like touching the main pad screen. This method is best for one-shots or drums or any sample you want to play as is with no change in pitch. If you want the pads to respond to different MIDI note numbers, you can adjust the pad note parameter on the MIDI page in pad settings. Like the pads, the internal sequences can also be triggered from external MIDI. Send MIDI note numbers 52 through 67 to start or stop the corresponding sequence. Use MIDI keys to select the incoming MIDI channel that will control the currently selected pad as a chromatic or melodic instrument. You can use the knobs to change the selected pad, thereby changing the current instrument. This mode is great for keyboardists, for example, to load backing tracks and also have a few different options for soloing. On the selected pad, press the Info button 2 times. Touch the MIDI tab in the lower right corner. If you set the MIDI in channel here instead of in Tools, you create a direct pipeline from your incoming MIDI to that pad. This approach will also play the loaded wave chromatically, so this is the best for triggering multiple pads on their own MIDI channels. The Blackbox does not offer a traditional MIDI through. The result of setting a pad to MIDI in channel 1 and MIDI out channel 2 is any MIDI data received on channel 1 will be redirected to channel 2. . You can set the MIDI out channel independently for pads versus sequences. A sequence can send MIDI to an external device and trigger the internal pad simultaneously. If you do not want to hear the sound from the pad, mute the pad in mix mode. If you'd like to assign an external MIDI controller to one of the internal parameters, start by touching the black box under the parameter you'd like to control. Next, touch the Learn button in the upper right corner. It turns blue. Wiggle the control and the Learn button returns to gray. This confirms that the assignment has been stored. Make sure to save your preset to save these changes.